Roses are red, violets are blue, taxes are great, inflation is too. And if you don't know what day it is, it's the first day of April, fool. Sorry, Dan, I couldn't resist. Our quote tonight is from John Wayne. Government has no wealth, and when a politician promises to give you something for nothing, he must first confiscate that wealth from you, either by direct taxes or by the cruelly indirect tax of inflation. And I was joking. That was an April Fool's joke. For those of you who don't know already, if you haven't been paying attention all day, I mean, geez, it's 6:30 Eastern. I hope you have figured out that it's April Fool's Day. But anyway, we are pleased to have a guest, a return guest to the show, Dan, Taxation Is Theft Behrman. And no, that's not just a joke. That is his actual name, because this man actually went and legally changed his name to Taxation Is Theft as his middle name. So Dan, welcome back. We're pleased to have you.
Yeah, it's awesome to be back. Thanks for having me on.
Again, I want to point out, Dan, you have a standing invitation. If you got some shit you want to talk about, more than welcome to come on here, because as we've talked in the past, you're one of our favorite, so that people know, you're one of our favorite activists out there, because you're pretty consistent, and that matters to us. And so those that don't know, Dan is one of the real ones. He doesn't get a driver's license because he doesn't buy his rights. He actually believes he was given those by his creator, whether he believes it's his mom or God, I don't care. But whoever that creator was is the one that gave him those rights. And he has the balls to take action on those things. Some of the stories that Dan told us in the last time we had him on, I still tell. I'm still telling those stories, because in many ways, Dan, I find a lot of inspiration from Dan, because again, I do have a driver's license, and I look towards what, making those kinds of decisions in my life, and man, it's hard to not do that. And so I give him credit for being a little bit more real than I am.
Yeah, so I feel Dan, like I'm the little pickup basketball player on the playground, and I'm like, oh, look at Michael Jordan. Like, he really knows what the fuck he's doing. You know? Right. It's like I feel like such a bitch compared to you when it comes to this stuff. So you're like, no, really doing it.
It's I mean, thanks, but it's it's really like, I don't know, I kind of do this out of just like it kind of comes as investigating the truth, because I heard all these people making all these like crazy claims, and I'm like, that can't be true. And it turns out, like, I don't know what percent, like some percent of it is actually true. And it's like, holy shit, that's crazy. So yeah, it really is. But what did somebody, like, I was getting into a conversation about this with somebody, and they were like, yeah, like, you're going to get stopped by the police. And then, like, and it just occurred to me, it's like, we need to stop taking the government so seriously, because that's, first of all, the whole thing is a fucking joke, but it's like, when we take it seriously, we are giving them, like, I used to hear people say, when you vote, you're legitimizing the state. And now I'm like, no, when you take the government seriously, you're legitimizing it. And if you come to realize like how big of a joke it is, and like the reasons they actually put forth to like claim their authority, the joke comes out, the punchline becomes apparent, and you're just kind of like, holy shit, these people are like, it's the emperor with no clothes. They're standing there with like, I have authority over you because a bunch of people said I have authority over you, and they're back here cheering me on. You'll never get to meet them, but but people are just like, oh, well, he's got people. It's us. We voted. It's for the people, by the people. And like, when we do that, it's like we're legitimizing this thing that has absolutely no legitimacy.
Right. Well, I agree.
I think we talked about it the last time you were on, which, by the way, was like, what was that, like almost 3 years ago or something like that? Yeah, it's been a while. And like, we talked about Mexico, because like I have a brother who lives down there, and like the farther you get into like rural Mexico, you see this somewhat in the States, but I think in the States there's much more obedience even in rural areas than there is in rural Mexico. I found that like it's nothing for someone to be driving a car that would never pass any kind of inspection with like 17 lawnmowers of varying different levels of parts in them. And that guy's the guy who will come and fix your tire on the side of the road for $10 or 100 pesos or whatever. Anyway, but like to just do it and like this guy doesn't have like a permit or any kind of license to do this or anything like that, but he can fix your tire and get you on the road out in the middle of nowhere,
right?
And he can do it for
right.
$10, and he's not going to hold you hostage and make you pay $700 and tell you you're going to die and scare your wife so that make sure that you pay the $600. It's so interesting to see how this stuff plays out when you look at people who actually don't take that seriously. And then back to the thing of like we see it now, a lot of people who get really upset about people coming across the border, but like I don't know, I kind of go back to our old friend where Marcus and I met, Adam Kokesh, who used to say, I have more respect for like the people who come over here illegally because like they do everything on a cash basis, they ignore all that stuff, they don't worry about those laws and everything, all the stuff that we like complain about. They're actually about that life. Yeah, they actually say like, "Nah, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting any of that stuff. No, I don't need that." So
yeah,
absolutely. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
So Dan, since the last time we talked to you, what have you been doing? What you been up to?
Lots. I started a wine company called Blood of Tyrants. I figured that was a fitting name.
It's wonderful. I'm gonna have to get a bottle of that.
I'll send you a bottle. It's really good stuff, and it's like I just kind of almost started it as a joke, like Blood of Tyrants. Okay, that'd be fun. That'd be a fun brand, right? And it kind of took off like as I was showing it to some people, and I paid for the first run, and like everyone was just buying it up like crazy. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here. So I created a white wine to go with it called the Tears of Tyrants.
Oh, nice.
And then I started. This is like a prototype right here, but I have some cans in the other room. Liquid Freedom, which is
energy tea.
Yeah. So we're still experimenting with this. Like we're going to be like creating a whole line of flavors and everything with it. But you can get the raspberry tea. I called it raspberry like the first one because I was like, yeah, give them the raspberries. Like,
yeah.
But it's So it really got interesting because I was like, okay, it's kind of an energy drink, but it's not. And then like as I was working with this food scientist to like come up with the formula, she's like, yeah, you got to put this and this and that. And I'm like, I don't want to put that shit in there. That's like poison. Like that's what's in like all these other drinks, right? And so we kind of fought it out because like the food industry has all these standards. She's like, you got to put this in and like this so like the shelf life lasts longer and like all this, and like it was getting crazy. And there was like I can see like this pressure for me to like use non-natural ingredients and all this other stuff. So we ended up with something that's actually pretty nice. We don't use any sugar. We use monk fruit for sweetener. We use a little bit of stevia. I'm going to try to get rid of the stevia in the next version. But go even further, like as far as natural ingredients. Cause now I'm finding out like what they're actually calling natural is like the processes they use to like, they start with a natural product and then they basically use like alcohol to extract the flavor.
Yeah. The stevia has like erythritol and everything.
So there's
always like, mixed in. Yeah.
So I'm trying to clean it up even more. And like, it looks like we have a good path to do that. But anyway, so like this set me on a path to like realize like how bad some of these energy drinks are, which is just absolutely insane. Cause like people drink like 2 or 3 of them a day.
Oh, no.
So anyways, we're working on that. Taxation Is Theft is still going. I've been working on a book pretty hard for like the past year and a half. It was colossal. So I had to end up breaking it up into, it looks like right now it's going to be 7 books.
Wow.
Oh,
yeah. It must've been huge.
Is it Memoirs of Tyrants? What is this book called?
I love it.
I might have to steal that. But it's like, as I was writing this, I was like, okay, I'm almost done. And there were a couple chapters that I was like, I'm just going to leave these blank for now because they're going to be small chapters. And then as soon as I actually started digging into them, it was like, no, this is like another monster book on its own.
Oh, wow.
And like the amount of information that I found is like, it's because I started going into like deep into American history, like reading the treaties between like the Feds and the Native Americans and the Feds in Mexico and Spain and like all. Long story short, okay, so we have this delusion that we fought the redcoats, we won, they left, and then we hear the people, we elected representatives and we sent them to create these new state constitutions, and then that turned into a federal constitution. No, that wasn't it at all. These guys self-proclaimed themselves the leaders of the colonies, went over to Paris and signed a treaty with the king saying, whatever ownership you have, which is, he's the king, he just claimed it, whatever ownership you have, sign that over to us. So he signed this treaty, and it now says, you now own this land and you now have the sovereign power. So it's like, okay. And then they came back to the colonies and they were just like, yeah, whoever wants to elect a representative, we're gonna have a constitutional convention and write a constitution. It's like, okay, what about the people who didn't vote?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, where did they get a part in this? Right. It's absolutely insane. So really, like, we think like there was no government and we rose from the ashes and like something, the brand new experiment. And it's like, no, it just transferred hands from one place to another. And what's interesting is like the actual, like, everything from the property lines of the states, like the states' borders of the original colonies, are actually the property lines that the king originally claimed. And that includes water rights out into the ocean from the Atlantic coast. It's like, it's crazy. And then
I always thought it was interesting that they talk about it every inauguration about like the peaceful transfer of power and all this stuff. And I'm like,
yeah, once everybody was dead, it was kind of peaceful, I gotta say.
right. Every time they're like, look, once again, the peaceful transfer of power. And I'm like, yeah, but like, it's not really a transfer of power. It's just like a transfer of figurehead. The power is still like behind the curtain somewhere. And they're, the Wizard of Oz is not who we think he is. So
yeah, it's well, and I also started doing like a really deep dive into like where rights come from, because I've always kind of like had this, like you were talking about earlier, whether it's some creator that like gives you your rights, right? And like I hear this among libertarians all the time, right? The Constitution doesn't grant rights; it protects them, or it limits the government from infringing on them. And I'm like, okay, all of this makes sense, but like, really, like if you think about it, none of that adds up. And so I started thinking about like, okay, what about people who have rights but they choose not to exercise those rights?
Yeah.
So it's like, if everybody's okay with people just taking stuff, they don't call it stealing, they just take stuff. And like, let's say you live in a little village where like nobody owns stuff and everybody's taking, there are no property rights because nobody claims a property right. So it's like, you can't say a property right came from your creator if like nobody cares about that right. So where does it actually come from? It comes from people declaring those rights, right? So like, I want to say, I want to have the right to live, which means you don't have the right to kill me, right? And so when you start looking at it like this, you see a total shift of like, okay, but then it's like, but doesn't the government have the rights to do certain things? And it's like, okay, well, let's separate that out into something else and call that power. So there's the right to do something and the power to do something, right? And then you can create like this little Venn diagram and see like, okay, what does the government have the right to do? What does it have the power to do? And then what do you have the right to do and the power to do? And then everything starts to make sense, right? You have the right to own property because you claim that right, because you want that right. And most other people recognize that right. Do you have the power to protect that property from somebody else? Well, for most people, probably. From the government, probably not. But if everybody comes together, then all of us together have enough power against the government to say, no, you're not going to touch property rights. And so I started looking at it, and I'm still kind of going through a process.
That's interesting.
But like, it's a kind of a different way to look at stuff. And I guess what I'm trying to do is make sure that like all the pieces of the puzzle of like what everybody's wants and needs and rights and everything, like how do they all fit together as a puzzle? Because if I believe something and you believe something, we both have to exist on the same planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you explain this difference of different people claiming that they have different rights if they both claim the same God? And then, but they claim different rights. It's like if you don't claim the right to remain silent, then I don't have the right to remain silent. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to tell them an answer. It's like, well, that's just you. I mean, you could remain silent, and who's to tell you you're wrong for doing that? But it's like if you don't claim that right, it's like how are you going to say someone's violating your rights if you yourself can't even say my rights were violated?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that lines up. It also, have you ever looked into Frederick Douglass? It's very similar to some things he said as well.
I haven't done too much of a deep dive, but maybe I should.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass is really neat, and he says something very similar to that. I've got one of our quotes that we do says pretty much that.
Yeah, it's very psychological. Like it's like if you don't, and that's where I think like if you look at like the way that the media and like the whole political system and the media have like, I don't know, coordinated this way of like just brainwashing everyone into thinking like this is the way that this is the setup, and this is why it's awesome. And these are the rights that you have and they came from this. And it's a very convenient way to make it to where like people won't assert their rights because they don't even know that they have them. Or if they do, they don't think they have the power to assert them.
And I think some of the like coming back to the creator stuff and the stuff comes from the creator. I'm guessing that's a holdover from like when the church was in charge, largely mixed with and I say it too, but I believe in God and I believe that in our freedoms and our rights do come from God, even if it's me that says I claim this and I get the power because of that urge, if you will, would come from God to say that, if you will. For people that have that kind of faith. But I think that holdover is actually another layer of statism, but it's religio statism, if you will, because that was, that probably is a holdover from when the Catholic Church was making those decisions for people, at least in the West. And people would say, our rights come from God, and we get that information from the Pope.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, and I always like whenever that topic comes up, I always go back to this. I saw this really good. It was a movie, not a documentary, but they supposedly worked with like a bunch of historians to make sure it was historically accurate, and it was about like the Anabaptist movement and everything. And what was interesting about this, and this is like more stuff that I researched for like my deep dive. Like, okay, we've had this. I remember when the first iPhone before it was released, it got stolen and like somebody was like leaking to the press, like, oh, I got the new iPhone. And then Apple sued some blogger because he supposedly found this iPhone in a bathroom. And this blogger was like, no, I got First Amendment, whatever. And Apple was like, no, you're just a blogger. You're not a journalist. And they were trying to like draw this line, but the First Amendment doesn't apply to you. You're just a blogger. And a lot of people held on to this. Like even today, people will say like, that's not the media. They're not protected by the First Amendment. Alex Jones isn't protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, let's think about this for a second. Like, why was it so important to put the First Amendment in there? Unless like, because there were things that they didn't put in there because they couldn't even conceive that they'd be violated. So put the First Amendment in there, that there was probably a thing that government was trying to regulate. And going all the way back to, this is interesting. They say freedom of the press. And if you go back to that time, like the press was what you called the machine. Like it wasn't the news, right? Like today I have a press pass. I'm the press. I'm with the press. It's like, no, the press was the machine that pressed the ink onto the paper. And Gutenberg, who invented the thing, was part of this Anabaptist movement. And he was printing flyers that were basically they were against the church at that point, which the church and the government were the same thing. And what was interesting about this was the whole process of baptism. And I don't want to say anything bad about anybody's religion, but what they were doing with this process of baptizing people is they were creating a ledger, a registry of all the people in the kingdom. And so, oh, well, if you're already an adult, you've already been, so all the children would go in there by default, right? Because you're baptized at birth, or shortly thereafter. All the adults, okay, fine, you can come in, we'll rebaptize you now, or we'll baptize you now, even though you're adults. And as we do that, we'll put you in the book, right?
Put you in the book,
so then the people who were against that were like, you know, nah, we don't want to do that. We don't want, and they started using the book to collect taxes.
Of course they did.
This guy hasn't paid his taxes. And so Gutenberg was actually printing stuff. And so like throughout the history, like you can see that they actually like required licenses just to have a printing press, kind of like how they're trying to make you have a license to have a gun at some places in the US.
Sure.
So it's all that stuff is like really, really fascinating. Like when you get into the history of like, how did we get here to believe in the things that we believe in, right? Like you ask most people, why do you have a driver's license? Because you need one to drive. Who told you that?
Right.
Like what? Why do you? So are you telling me if you didn't have that little card, throw that in the trash for a minute, hop in the car, turn it on, let's see what happens. Yeah, and it's like, and like people are like, no, the police will swarm my house.
Well,
who's going to show up?
And again, you go to like rural areas, and like I grew up, you know, my parents come from like rural central Louisiana, and I grew up going out to the country like routinely, and like I had cousins who were driving like the family truck or station wagon or whatever on the little country roads at like 11, 12, 13 years old. Obviously no license. Like what you needed to be able to drive was to know how to drive and the keys. And that was it.
Right.
Like the keys, gas, and the like the know-how of how to do it. And it's now again, like there's a natural inclination as human beings for us to want like to make sure that the people who are driving have those, you know, have the know-how and aren't, you know, just, you know, you don't want like some 6-year-old just who's never driven a car just getting behind the wheel and smashing into everybody. But the idea that like a license is the thing that guarantees that, when like the same 6-year-old could still get the keys and still go drive around and smash into everything. And the only difference is like, well, after the fact, you can be like, why was this kid driving a car? And look, he doesn't have a license. Like, no shit, he's 6. But it doesn't. It's like this false sense of protection that we get. You know, right. It's the parents like, letting him get access to the car was the problem, not the fact that he didn't have a license.
Exactly. Or like, and imagine this, like, let's say you have some super smart 6-year-old who figures out how to make some money on like, you know, trading Bitcoin or whatever.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Uber driving.
But imagine that if they're smart enough to do all that, don't you think maybe they're smart enough to drive? And like the likelihood that's going to happen, probably not so much, but it's back to the thing of like people should be judged based on what they're able to do, not based on like some
I've made this argument for the longest time. Like I'm a big sports fan, and I used to do a sports talk show back in the day, my first job out of college. And it was right around the time that like Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and all these guys were coming out, and they were going straight from high school to the NBA. And you had all these people. It was really a stupid argument saying like, no, these guys need to go get their education. I'm like, really? Like if they were like a 14-year-old concert pianist and they were playing in like a symphony or something like nobody would be like, no, he needs to get his education. Like, no, like you go do the thing that you're really good at as early as you're able to compete at the highest level. And you do it. Yeah. Nobody said that about Jennifer Capriati playing tennis when she was 16 years old. Like, and the Williams sisters, same thing. They were like 15, 16 years old. They were getting private tutors in their own time and like basically like a homeschool model where they were probably only going to school like 2 or 3 hours a day. And the rest of the time they were training for tennis. But like, it's all, it should all be like up to like, what can you handle? What are you capable of? And what are your interests and your desires? And like having all these arbitrary rules that lump everybody into these categories where like, sorry, you can't get out of this unless you're like truly exceptional and your parents like break all the rules to like that we're trying to hem you in with.
Right. And it's usually for convenience, unfortunately. So we were talking earlier about driving without a license and like, so what's interesting is like you dig into, you kind of look at the conspiracy theories and they all say something along the lines of driver's licenses are only for commercial purposes. And there's some truth to that, but when you look at the law, you can't really see it. It's really confusing and vague. But as I was writing the book, I was like, that's not good enough. I can't put this in the book and make that claim, right?
Right.
So I started digging back further, and I started finding like all of the cases that these people were citing. And what I did was I actually went back and I dug up the laws that were written at those times. And what you find is the laws very, very explicitly said that those driver's licenses were for commercial use. And then over time, they just kind of dropped the word commercial. But what happened was, and this is even like, I mean, the whole history is really interesting, right? Because the states never passed driver's license laws. It started out in cities. And it would be like, there was this case in Virginia where this guy's like driving through the city, and he had his driver's license revoked. And he took this to the Supreme Court of Virginia. And basically what they were saying is like, okay, yeah, clearly there's a difference between regular driving and commercial driving. But they also started citing the laws at the time, which said that the license requirement was created by the city. The license was issued by the city. And anyone from outside of the city could drive through the city as long as they didn't live in the city for more than 7 days. After 7 days, you'd have to get a license. Further down the road, no pun intended, what they did was so like now you had like interstate commerce starting to go on, people driving trucks from one state to another, and people getting into accidents, right? Now, of course, like cars weren't all that safe back then. So these things were like nasty accidents. And of course, they were all over the news. And of course, politicians wanted to look like they were solving a problem. So that's when they went to state by state licenses that would cover the whole state, because you wouldn't have like, oh, well, mine's from this city and mine's from that. 1,000 different cities issuing driver's licenses, right? So it was a matter of convenience that they went to the state system. And now they're even trying to like federalize the whole thing, where it's like, you know, if you have a driver's license in one place and you get a point, it's going to automatically show, like, you can't get a driver's license in the other state because now they talk to each other and like all kinds of stuff. So it's like they're trying to create, and it's all about convenience and like, oh, we got to protect people. And
half the time, man, that's how they rob us of our shit, is convenience.
Yeah, and people are like, well, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, that's the other part. It's that's that psychological part I was talking about, where it's like, just if you can just convince people, like, they're really good salespeople. You got to give them that, because they sell their BS like very, very well, because everybody's bought it. It's like you have a handful of people who have like, hey, wait a second, I don't believe you. You sound like a charlatan,
right?
And even the people who say like, you sound like a charlatan, but you're my charlatan, so I'm going to vote for you and do everything you say.
Right. Yeah, and then when you're against it, it's like, oh, you just want more people to die in car accidents,
right?
Like, you really believe that that's what I want? Like, is it more difficult to believe that, or is it easier to believe that somebody wants more people to die in car accidents than somebody else wants to just have control over you arbitrarily? Like,
right, 100%.
Somehow the other one's easier to believe, or easier to not believe.
Right.
100%. Before we leave the subject, I did find that quote I was looking for. This is Frederick Douglass, who said, find out what people will submit to, and there you will find the exact amount of injustice which will be imposed upon them until they fight back with words or blows, or with both.
Yes.
So again, a very similar idea.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. That's absolutely, and it's like I want to say Voltaire has a quote like that too, where it's like,
probably
it's yeah, no, it's that. I mean, it's like when the government comes knocking, it's like, are we gonna let them in our homes, or are we gonna tell them to fuck off? Like,
right.
That's the question. And when they know, you know, like, imagine the police show up at your house, right? And you've got like 10 cops in front of your house, and like they're dragging you away, kicking and screaming. Your neighbors come out. What are they going to do? Are they going to say, oh my God, the government has come and they're inflicting tyranny upon my neighbor? Or are they going to be like, oh, he must have done something bad?
Right.
And it's like the assumption is there. And it's crazy, because you walk into these situations and like we're kind of always unsure what to do, right? You can walk into a room and you see one person beating up another person. I was actually just reading a really great book on human psychology, and it's more than just psychology, it's biology and everything else, but human behavior, I guess. And like, if you walk into a room and you see one person beating another person, it's like, okay, is the person beating them the criminal because that's the first thing you see? Or is the person getting his ass whooped the criminal and the other person's just fighting back? And how do you know, right? Because if one of them's not wearing a uniform, how do you know? And then it starts coming into your mind like, okay, well, this one looks a little bit more like me. That's like a natural, like, and of course this like leads into racism and all this other stuff, but it's like part of that's in our biology, but then part of it's also in our thought process to recognize like, no, wait, that came from the other side of my brain. Hold on, let me try to figure this out. But then of course, then you sit there like, oh shit, I don't know who to help. And you'll sit there until like, you know, one person's dead, like trying to figure out like who you should actually be helping. And of course, like that's the whole concept of a trial, right? Okay, well, let's just break up the fight for now. Let's take them to a court and let's let all the evidence come out and see what's actually going on here. But when the cops show up, they're just like, yeah, we're just going to kill one of them.
Right. Or shoot their dogs. One of the two.
Well, and the other thing about it,
bang a baby or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, the other part of it too is, I don't know if that would necessarily stop them, but yeah, but the other part of it is too, it's that element of, you know, when this stuff is going down and it's not just like, I don't know who to help. It's also like, am I going to end up getting caught in the crossfire of this thing? Is, you know, am I going to end up becoming like getting my ass kicked because I'm trying to stick my nose where it doesn't belong or anything like that? And that's again where you go to this psychological element of, you know, like a Randy Weaver or, you know, the Waco situation. If like half of Texas had like rallied towards Waco to stop the ATF from doing what they did, it's a whole different way that thing goes down, right? But instead, like it's these, and that's why they do. And I was actually thinking when you were talking earlier about how some of this stuff kind of evolved and like how the concepts of rights evolved. I actually think The Walking Dead did a really good job of like depicting some of this stuff in like this pseudo anarchistic state that where they're like, okay, there's no government because everybody's dead except for this handful of people who have survived so far. But there are all these different little factions and they have their own different ways of kind of governing themselves, so to speak, and like dealing with outsiders, dealing with insiders and everything else, and dealing with how they're going to protect each other and whatnot. And there was one of them that they had this thing where like, if you saw something, you just had to say claim and it was yours. And like nobody could, you got to have it. Even if the other person was about to pick it up, if they didn't say the word and you said the word, you win.
It's like shotgun.
And you have right. Yeah. It's exactly what I was going to say is like, I have teenage boys and like shotgun, seat check, you know, all this kind of stuff like comes in where like, if you're going to get up from the table to go throw your plate away, you have to say seat check and that lets everybody know that they can't take your seat while you're getting up. And it's these little rules that like, they're not really enforceable except by violence, like your willingness to defend yourself. Because if somebody wants to take your seat, they're just going to take your seat and then you have to forcefully remove them from your seat. And so it becomes this weird kind of goofy, and it's just like high school boys goofing around with each other. And it's like their little ways of like policing each other and the rules they've come up with. But it kind of goes back to, all right, so if I'm a Negan, let's say in the Walking Dead scenario, and I know that there's a handful of people who are really, really a threat to my power. Well, all I have to do is make an example to the one who they see as their leader. Make an example of that person, or make an example of some fringe person who is acting up a little bit, and that'll get everybody else in line. Because unless they all bum rush me, like it's going to be really hard for that person to defend themselves by themselves.
Yeah, so, and they don't want to. They have that feeling of, you know, when they have that leader, and I'm thinking of like the I don't know, the scene I'm thinking of is probably like they didn't outnumber Negan, but like if they're looking for, if they have their leader, they're waiting for their leader to say, okay, let's move, right? They're not going to move with that because they're like, oh, maybe he has a plan, maybe
right.
Like, so you have a lot of people kind of hesitating on that reason, but your point, like like about Waco and those situations, like look at Bundy Ranch and like what they were able to do because they did stay together.
Right.
And you're absolutely right
Good
about all
example.
these rules and protocols too. And like what's crazy is like there's like these weird little doctrines that you come across every once in a while, digging through like Supreme Court stuff and just like legal history. And it's like they'll say things. I can't think of where they say this, but it's like they'll say that the law is kind of crafted by society, right? Not like forget about what the legislators write. You have it's like, let's say for example, if the law says one thing, right? But then you get to a court and the judge is like, oh, that's not the law. We're going to rule against it. Well, it's like, okay, how can you do that? It says right here, it doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. Guilty, whatever. He's going to make his own decision as if the law is completely something else. Well, okay, but you have the jury. What if the jury sides with whatever the law is not also, right? And then what if it goes to an appeals court and then to the Supreme Court and they all say the same thing? Yeah, we know that law is there, but we don't care about it. Right?
Jury nullification is a great way to like exploit that. Yeah.
Yeah, and what's really crazy is we think of like, no, there has to be like rule of law and everything has to be exactly as it is. But what's interesting is how many times that actually doesn't happen. Like when Georgia was just became a state and it was all Indian territory to the west, the Supreme Court told them you don't have the authority to regulate the Indian territory to the west. They did, and I think the president, I think it was Andrew Jackson, he's like, yeah, do whatever you want. And so they regulated the Indian territories. There was a dispute between Colorado and New Mexico. They were like, the border is going to be on the 37th parallel. And so they drew all the maps. And then like one day some guy was doing a survey and they were like, oh shit, the border's not actually on the 37th parallel. The 37th parallel is over there. So we have to move the state border. And they got into the dispute because one state didn't want to give up that land. Went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's like, okay, we know it's not the 37th parallel, but we're not moving that line.
It's right.
It's like squatters' rights at that point almost.
Exactly. It's like, why didn't you say anything sooner?
Yeah, property lines are like that. If somebody puts up a fence on your property and you don't say anything about it after a certain amount of time, 5 years, 10 years, depending on where you are and everything like that, now that's their property.
And it's for the exact same reason. Why didn't you say anything sooner? And it's like, especially if someone builds something on that line and it's like, okay, so now you want like, so what? He's lived in this house for 20 years and you're telling him like now the westest 5 feet of it belongs to you. Like what? No, that's crazy.
You want to take a wrecking ball to the east wing of his house.
Yeah. Somebody can walk into his kitchen and steal a pie whenever you want.
Where I live right now, somebody moved next door to me and literally tried to do that. They were like, our property line is I have a building in the back of my house and where that building ends, it's like a foot to 2 feet from there is where the property line is, right? And because we had to have it redone, we had to have somebody come out and do all the bullshit. And what do you know? We were right when we moved in here and the building was already built, that building didn't need to be tore down because it's been there for like 50 years. But they did actually try to do that. They wound up moving because they were shitbags and they lived next to a bunch of hippies. And I guess they didn't like that. But yeah, one of the things that I find interesting about that is that everybody has a business that does this. The current business that I work for, often, like for instance, you're not supposed to because I work in I deal with parts and stuff, and I'm not going to go into what I do, but and we're supposed to charge shipping on something that they're replacing if they didn't report it within 72 hours, right? That's what's supposed to happen. That never happens. It's always like a month down the road that we actually cover it. But on paper, it says that. And why is that? Because we know that the real world doesn't work in a 72-hour framework. So we made adjustments based on that. But we like to think, and I'm talking about us, anarchists, libertarians, we think that the government has steady rules, and they do not. They're making the exact same kind of judgments that we are. They're making, that doesn't really work in the real world. How many times have you heard that? I've heard it from cops. I'm going to give you a break this time because that doesn't make any sense. You know, all the time. And
Right.
so I think that what you're getting at, Dan, is really all of this is about perspective. It's about taking control of your own life. And, you know, we like to talk about being self-owners. Well, self-owners don't rent themselves out all the time. And we need to take ownership of what we believe we have a right to and how we claim that right is like Frederick Douglass said. First thing I'm going to do is say, hey, you can't have my thing you're trying to steal. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm probably going to get a gun. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all that's really interesting. And when you get that book out, I want a link. And because you're like, I've started this off, I really enjoy your knowledge. And but to kind of shift gears to one of the primary reasons that we brought you on here, I know that you've been working with I don't remember the name of it. I call it the African Liberty Project. Is that what it's actually called?
Shit, I didn't study for this pop quiz.
Sorry.
So I know they were called ALED for a while, which I could not tell you exactly what it's called. It's the camp is called the African Liberty Camp.
Okay.
And it's usually somewhere in Uganda. They bring in students from all over the continent. I was invited there in 2019 when I was running for president. And I was like, hell, why not? That sounds like an adventure. So I went out there and I got to talk to all these great students about liberty. And I kept in contact with a lot of them. And I helped one of them start a business out there. And every year when they have this Liberty Camp, I'm always helping them out somehow. I'm helping them raise money from the US because they don't have PayPal or anything. Like, they don't have any real easy way to send money. Like, even for me, now that I'm like, I know the ins and outs of their systems, it's a pain in the ass for me to send them money once I collect it from the PayPal. So we have a fundraiser, which the link is in the description. And what's great about this is so they raise money, they use it to pay for food and hotels and travel for other students. So it's kind of it's very inclusive, right? They're trying to make it available for people all over the continent. So there are students who are interested. They're going to come there. We're basically raising money to sponsor the food and travel expenses and hotels and everything.
Cool.
And and it's but it's an amazing project. They always have some great speakers there. I've spoken there a couple times. I know Jack Lloyd has a couple times. Let's see who else. Kyle Varner has been out there at least once. So yeah, it's an amazing group. I really like what they're doing. They actually started this when I first started talking to them. They were like, they were asking me if I could send them books, and they were collecting books. They wanted to build a library, so we ended up sending a bunch of books out there, and they were all Liberty books. And they set up, it was this little brick building, and they set up a library there. And just to kind of give you like what the state of the country is like in Uganda, I went out there and I brought one of my big Taxation Is Theft flags, and we took a picture next to it. There was like maybe 6 of us in the picture. One of them was this guy named Jerome, who's like he's an activist. He's the one who reached out to me. Awesome guy. He was arrested for posting this picture.
Oh, wow.
On social media. Yeah. So like, and this is the thing, like, let's talk about arbitrary laws, right? Their constitution absolutely says they have freedom of speech, but they'll arrest you if you say something they don't agree with. So yeah, it's pretty wild out there, but and every country in Africa's got a different government. Those all have histories. Like, this is weird. Because I mean, like, the whole continent's been colonized, right? But we don't really think about it. We think about, okay, there's all these countries there, and they're not all run by white people anymore. And it's like, okay, which ones have their official language in English? Which ones have their official language in French? and which ones have their official language in what else is there? I think there's like one other that's got a
Dutch.
Yeah,
Is
maybe.
it Dutch?
But this is what's interesting. If you look at a map and you color it in with like, okay, these ones are English, these are French, and then you compare the outlets that they use in those countries. The English, the ones where English is their official language, they use the UK plug. The French use the French plug, and it's like wait a minute, this is like the white people aren't in charge anymore, but it's still a fucking colony. It's
right.
Yeah.
It's back to that thing of like, okay, we came in, we took over, and we signed over the power to somebody else, and now that's just our puppet, and we just control them, and they do whatever we want. And it's like, holy heck. So you still have I see people arguing over the state of Africa and how it's I made a post the other day about how Africa is so wealthy, but they continue being robbed, and that's why there's so many people in poverty. And somebody had to come out and reply, oh yeah, but they're doing much better, even though their resources are being stolen, because without America and China and Russia, they wouldn't have clean drinking water. And it's like, okay,
yeah, right.
Trade with people without ripping them off,
right? For sure.
Well, not only that, but I wonder how much of that is because of like if you continue to like rape an area for its natural resources, like how much you cripple the ability to like actually like take advantage of the natural resources that are there and to do like some of this stuff. Because it's not like you go back far enough, it's not like the Egyptians didn't have stuff that's like way more in tune with the earth and more advanced than some of the stuff that we even have now. that just got like buried and stashed away and destroyed, and all the ideas and plans for it and everything got hidden so that the folks who pillaged that area could control through other means.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely that. There's I mean, most people aren't like, you talk about like, why are people in poverty? They're not allowed to grow food. Like you can't own land and grow food on it unless you're going to grow enough to feed the president and sell enough to make enough money to pay the taxes on it. It's like you just want to like find some land and like there's lots of land that's like very fertile, beautiful land. Nobody's occupying it, but nope, you can't grow food. You got to pay rent, and it's crazy. The whole thing's a scam, and it's like you go back a few thousand years, it wasn't like that. Like I mean, people had like their little societies, and like yeah, sure, it was underdeveloped. This is interesting. The worldwide statistics about like who's actually in poverty when they talk about like poverty rates and everything else. They go by based on whether you live in a place that has a floor that is not dirt or concrete. Now, this is what's interesting. Because I'm looking at like home ownership rates in Mexico, because like I go around Mexico a lot and I don't see like a lot of homeless people sleeping on benches, right? I see that all over the US. What I do see in Mexico is people go into the jungle and they squat and they're just like, this is my little square and I'm going to start building on it. Years go by, they build one room. Years go by, they dig a well. Years go by, they build a bathroom. And they'll just continue building like this. You can't do that in the US.
Right.
But this is the thing. When you look at the poverty US, but if you look at the number of people who are paying rent, it's much higher in the US than it is in Mexico. And that's because these people, they have this land. No one's coming to kick them off. They have shelter over their head. They have a well with water in it. But their floor, it's not tile or hardwood or carpet. So they're in poverty. They're in poverty. Yeah. And so we're putting them in that statistic. And
does it count if you have stained concrete as your floor? Are you still in poverty? If you're one of those people who like grooves the concrete to look like tile and then you just paint
Depends
the
on how you fill out the survey, I guess.
Again, arbitrary
where they have the exposed pipes and brick and everything inside. What were you saying, then, Marcus? I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just saying, again, once again, arbitrary rules.
Yeah, and it's like, who came up and like, I get it, right? You have this problem of, okay, who do you know? And it's like what they say: liars don't use there's statistics don't lie, but liars use statistics. It's like yeah, okay, that's an interesting number set, but like, let's not apply it to everything because of what it actually says.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, but the reason I was digging into that was because when you compare, like, we have this problem in the US of like, we're worried about like the consolidation of all of the property into like the hands of like, what is
BlackRock
BlackRock, yeah.
BlackRock and JP Morgan and
it's like, okay, if they own all the land, we have no choice but to rent, and then there's going to be no jobs, so we're going to complain that we can't pay our rent. Where it's like, during the pandemic, you know who wasn't worried about whether they were getting a paycheck next month? The people who didn't have to pay rent or a mortgage payment. And it's like, so don't borrow money like that. And it's like, you look at the way things work in Mexico, like even for people who are supposedly in poverty, and it's like, they were better off during the pandemic because they were like, yeah, that sucks, we're not getting on any of these money. But nobody was like, it wasn't like people panicking and going broke and like, you know, raiding the toilet paper stores.
Right. And we've been preaching this forever. I mean, like when everybody was raiding the toilet paper, I had stores of toilet paper. You know, because
you weirdo.
I know.
Hey, can I borrow some of that?
Not now.
See, I had a friend he's like, I don't understand what the big deal is. Like the toilet is like right by the shower. You could just step out and just like wash yourself down the drain, and you're good. Like,
right. Yeah, but so okay, we came from Africa back to North America, which is I guess that's like where a lot of my knowledge is. But like, I've connected a lot of dots and similarities between what's going on over there and over here, and like it really is. So anyway, so back to this Liberty Camp.
By the way, real quick for you, so it is Action for Liberty and Economic Development. I looked it up for you, so there we go.
I'm terrible with acronyms. So I'm trying to think. There was like a word that I've been using for a while, and I only recently found out that it was an acronym. I don't know which one that was, but I'm sure that's happened to me several times. But yeah, so it's an awesome project, and it's I think it's really absolutely needed because like people are. This is what's interesting. Like when people understand that like they have to get their own liberty, like it's. I mean, like. Okay, there's this video going around of this bird, and it's like it's a baby bird. It's like a little chick, and there's a little worm crawling around on the ground, and this bird's just there, like waiting for the worm to jump in its mouth because it's used to being fed, by its mother, right? And it's like at some point, this bird is going to learn, hey, look, the food's right there. All I got to do is take it. Yeah. And maybe it's going to be like the point where he gets hungry enough, or maybe it's going to be where he sees another bird do it. And so like there are people all around the world who are suffering from this problem where one of their biggest limitations on freedom is themselves, not realizing that they have the power to make themselves free. And that, I mean, because if you have this perspective, I am free, I live in a free world, I can do whatever I want. There are things out there that if I do whatever I want, they might have a problem with it and they might come after me. It might be a government agency, it might be a bunch of human beings, or it might be a bear, right? Those things are out there. But like, just because you can't walk through the forest without getting attacked by a bear, that we don't call that being not free, right? So if you have this perspective of I am free, I understand that I can do whatever I want, I understand that there are dangerous people out there who are going to try to rob me and harm me, then once you have that perspective, things change totally. And once you can share that perspective with a lot more people, then you have more people who refuse to help support those systems, right? They refuse to pay their taxes. They refuse to they vote against, you know, growing the police department or creating this new system or whatever else. they start withdrawing their support from these systems. And when these systems don't have that support anymore, they just dissolve. The only reason they exist is because we have given them support. That's it. Without our support, they don't exist.
Yeah, and Rothbard said very similar things. He said, basically that if the people tomorrow would realize that the government is nothing more than a mafia game writ large, it will pass away like any other mafia gang. That's not a quote, but it's close. And it's the same idea. It is just stepping up. In saying no, and not to continue to bring up Adam, but that was kind of the point of what Adam was trying to do is, if people plant the seed of no, federal government's too damn far away, let's bring this back to closer now. And now what I find funny about that is that Adam, and I know that other people talked about it, but Adam really planted that seed, but now everybody's talking about secession. Everybody's talking about that. And what happened was the consciousness of the world shifted a little in that direction, and particularly within libertarian circles, because that influence and Adam and people like yourself who were calling for similar ideas started influencing people, and now you see that coming into fruition. But all that is people going, that makes sense, and starting to adopt those kinds of ideas.
Exactly. So yeah, and it's interesting. You just reminded me of this. I was reading through. I actually had this idea to take all these Supreme Court cases and make a book just out of the original text of these, just because there's so much fascinating stuff in there. But there was a case where the Supreme Court actually said the government doesn't even really exist except in an abstract sense, which is the exact thing as there was I don't know if it was Rothbard or somebody else who said there is no government. There's just groups of men with fancy titles. And it's and the Supreme Court said this. It's that's really interesting. I don't think they would dare say that today. Right. But and this was probably 1800s.
I was looking everywhere for this. I'm sorry, I was going to just try to show it, but y'all seen this meme, right?
Yeah.
This is what it's like. It's until you get told, oh no, look, you can put your feet down. It's okay.
This one always reminds me of that Robin Hood scene. And I don't know whether to go to Men in Tights or the Kevin Costner version. I can't swim. I can't swim.
Right. But it is. I mean, it's like that though. We're
absolutely, and it's there in all of our lives. I mean, fear of heights, fear of everything. It doesn't matter what it is. Fear of a new food, there's no way I'm going to eat that. And interestingly enough, so there's this whole thing where people are oh, it's disgusting. In China they eat bugs and all this other stuff. That actually came from what happened during famines, where they were that's all we got.
I'm gonna eat some bugs. That's it.
There's people in I remember there was a movie I saw way back when, and it was in some of the camps in Vietnam where the POWs were, where they were just eating roaches and rats and everything, because it was that or nothing.
Yeah.
Starve to death or eat this rat and don't even worry about what diseases it might have.
Right.
Because
and to that point, it's that's when it's okay, either I'm gonna starve and die, or I gotta eat the rat. But it's it's at what tyrants like to do is, well, let's not make them uncomfortable. Let's keep them comfortable so that they won't have to eat us, the rats. And they do a great job at that. Right. And I think that's we wonder why the United States hasn't collapsed after almost 200 years or over 200 years. And it's a lot of people are oh, because it's the greatest country ever. And I'm no, I think they were just a little bit smarter, and they realized keep the people happy, keep the rate of inflation down as low as you can, but still use it to steal. And it's just indulge yourself, just don't go overboard at the people's expense. And that's how they've been able to keep it together for so long. And I think they're starting to, I guess the next generation of tyrants haven't quite learned how to control the system.
Right.
Well, it's just a really good model. If you're going to embezzle, it's just a really good embezzlement model where do it just enough that you can live like you want to live, but not enough to get caught.
Yeah.
Because if you do it enough to get caught, now you're in, federal prison for embezzling. But if you don't get caught, you're just like really rich and like, doing your job and, keep doing your job really well. And they won't sniff you. So yeah, it's crazy. What's interesting about that though, because you touched on this a little bit about the situation in Africa because I had never really thought about that. But like, if you think about it, like, okay, what's the official language? And then yes, like crazy, like what outlets do you use? It's like this. There's a guy, I don't know if you're familiar with him. His name is Yanis Varoufakis. He's more like from the left, but he talks about what he calls techno-feudalism, where he's basically talking about how like the new land that the feudalists are going to rule is the cloud. That it's where your data is, where all your information, where all your apps, all your ability to access anything anymore is going to be. Like the more and more digital everything gets, that digital real estate is where the way. And so we're like talking about like Jeff Bezos and Amazon and like Apple and iCloud and all how like, look at the companies that are becoming the largest. And it's these companies that control access to information, control access to data, and really even like farm your data for like how to sell you stuff. Because what he's talking about is not so much that they're going to rent seek in the sense of you're going to have to pay them to store your data so much as, no, store your data here for as free or as cheap as possible. But it's our data.
Right.
And we're going to use it to sell you shit all the time. And you're going to have like this perfectly curated algorithm that's going to constantly keep you in this state of like getting everything that you want and maybe slightly steering what you want in different directions, but really just making it to where they can see ahead of the game where to start steering their production efforts so that they can make all the things that you want available at your fingertips via drone or whatever else, and all you have to do is think about it, and it's going to be delivered to your doorstep.
Yeah.
And for people that don't understand that are thoroughly like immersed in a lot of the technology that we're around, and to be clear, I'm not averse to technology, but there's a bit of a green anarchist in me, and I would be just fine if we stepped back, maybe became Amish a little bit. I'd be all right with that. But I can't do a lot of that, and because it is getting very, very. Because my wife does not have a cell phone. She does, and not because she does. I told her she couldn't. I'm not one of those. It's because she doesn't want one. Yeah, I know she doesn't want to tell her. but no,
he did say he was Amish,
right? Right.
Enough.
You're right for sure. But it is very difficult to do just about anything. Like for instance, we have a bank account, right? Now we have to have there has to be a cell phone number that you can receive text to so that you can get access to your bank. So at least with our bank. And
yeah, you don't even have, as difficult as security is with that stuff. Like if you wanted to not have that on the internet to keep yourself safe and secure, they're like, no, doesn't matter. You have to, otherwise you can't have an account.
Right.
Anyway, continue. Sorry.
So for people that don't understand that is it is technology, and that those kinds of enslavements are right now hard to live without. And because I don't deal with a lot of technology, just because I don't want that kind of control over my life, and whether it's government or corporations, I don't trust either one of them. So people need to understand that this isn't like something that's down the road. This is being implemented right now. These kinds of controls are being implemented every day all around us, and they're never in our best interest. Sure, they'll sell it to us that it's for ease or it's for whatever it is, but the facts are it is another way to control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, there's, you're right. Like, people are going to, look at the benefits. Like, I know people who are like, I was talking to a friend. He was like, he wouldn't download TikTok. He's like, no, because they're spying. There's all this other stuff. And I was like, but you're on Instagram. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, so like, what are you worried about? Like what data are like, do they actually have of you that you're actually worried about? And he's like, well, you know, they're using it to like fine tune the ads. And I'm like, yeah, but so if they didn't do that, you'd essentially be complaining. And I know I'm like I'm like arguing the wrong side of this argument here for him, but I'm like, so if they didn't like harvest all your data to find out what you want and what ads to show you, they'd be showing you a bunch of random ads of things that you really didn't care about. And then you'd be completely annoyed. Like, remember when you used to watch like cartoons and like they would show you these ads for like all kinds of shit you didn't care about?
Yeah, like Sears tools.
Yeah. So it's like it's,
and soap operas got their name from that, like for a reason.
Selling soap.
It was literally like they're selling you like dish soap and laundry detergent and the things that women buy because women are watching soap operas so that they can do their, you know, their household chores.
And they can target it, but only so much, right? So it's like you know, like if I'm involved in technology and I want to know as soon as the new technology comes out, because like I mean that's what I do professionally, right? Software. And so like if something new comes out, I want to know about it. So okay, yeah. But it's like, but I get it too. Like on the other side, it's like, okay, like going back to Walking Dead, right? Perfect example was, okay, look, guys, we don't need to like run around this town. We're all friends here. We don't need to run around our town with our guns on us all the time. Let's put them in the armory, and just so we make sure none of them go missing, let's write them all down on a piece of paper on a ledger. So they registered all their guns and they kept them all in one place, locked up. And then as soon as Negan came in, he's like, "Oh, how convenient!"
Right, thank you. It's on the shelf.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing. Like somebody had taken one gun out to hunt zombies, and he was like, "I'm going to use this to kill Negan." Negan knew instantly. He's like,
not on the register, and
there's one missing.
There's one missing.
Right?
Yeah, where is it?
Yeah, so it's the same kind of thing. It's like, yeah, some of these things like might sound great if like, I mean, because like you can look at it in two ways, right? If you want to solve a murder, it's like if you could just pick up the bullet casing and it's got a serial number imprinted on the back, yeah, that'll help you catch whoever at least bought the gun pretty easily, right? Not necessarily the guy who pulled the trigger, but it might get you pretty close,
right?
But then it's like, okay, how could that be used against you? Could they take one bullet from the shooting range where you were practicing, take it home and plant it on somebody else, and like, now that's proof, and the jury's never going to believe anything else,
right?
What about registration? Like, well, you're the one who bought the gun, yeah, but somebody stole it from me. Well, you didn't report it stolen fast enough. I didn't know it was stolen. Somebody broke into my house. I was in another state. How was I supposed to know? Like, all these situations come up where it's like, okay, you could royally screw somebody, but so it's like, okay, this system could be good, it could be bad, but ultimately we're putting this power in the hands of this chaotic system of government, which is like, who's running, like whose hands are we actually putting it in? If anybody, like, you know, any prosecutor, any cop, any malicious person can pick up that thing and like, you know, if that's the ring, right, the government, anybody can pick that up at one time. Why do you want to put all your power into this one ring when it's like anybody could pick that up? You don't know who's going to pick it up next. You don't know, right? And that's the dangerous part.
And I think the perfect example of that is actually India and Gandhi. You know, socialism worked great under Gandhi. Gandhi died. You know, and as soon as he did, the next guy that got in there just absolutely destroyed the Indian economy directly after Gandhi was gone, because Gandhi actually cared about people. Yes, he was a socialist, but he actually cared about folks.
Right.
So yeah, these kinds of things, the problem that people don't put together, I think, is that what we're talking about is monopoly. And most people will tell you, well, monopoly is bad, right? Except for when you're talking about government. They want to put everything in the government's hands. Why, if we're going to do like what you're talking about, if you have a bullet situation where, you know, you want to be able to trace bullets, wouldn't you as a manufacturer want the opportunity to make that a selling point so that people buy your weaponry, because you can guarantee that you have a serial number that fits your gun or whatever it is, and work out a system as a manufacturer and say, okay, we follow that, and we can, if somebody in your neighborhood were to do that, but we offer that, and maybe this other company has a better understanding and a better way to trace down the bullet or whatever it is, and allow for those to compete. Because then once you have competitive markets, then, and all this, but for the audience that might not, those two competing forces find the better of the two, and usually it's the one that functions best for the people, because that's what the market would have dictated.
Right. Well, and I think most people would be the ones to say that they just don't want that. But at that point, it's like, okay, like who is anybody else? And this goes back to the question of right versus power, right? Is it right for you to force people to buy the guns and the bullets that self-imprint, or is that like, do you have the right to do that or the power to do that?
Right. Agreed.
And because, or more accurately, do you have the right or the power to do that without the consent of the people who are buying them?
Sure.
Or
well, and again, though, the market should decide that if it is more popular to have a bullet that can't be traced, that's what should be the thing. And if that's causing trouble, then to me, it's on the manufacturer to try to solve that problem, not somebody who has my liberty in their hands and monopolize that liberty. Is it a perfect system? Probably not.
Well, this is an interesting one too. The let's talk about like seat belts and airbags. Those are all mandated by government. Now, government didn't invent them. These car companies were actually like, oh, how come like people are dying in our cars? How come? I bet if we could advertise that our cars are safer, we'd sell more of them.
Yeah.
And like, what's it? Volvo is supposedly like the safest car or whatever. Like they hold the title for that. Okay. So if people want to be safer in their car, they'll get a Volvo. And it's like a lot of people today still think that if it weren't for the government, cars wouldn't have seatbelts and airbags.
Yeah.
What?
Right. Yeah.
That's insane.
Actually, funny you say that, because I think one of the things that you can attribute to government is the fact that cars aren't as safe as they used to be, because they're made out of plastic and fiberglass now instead of metal, because of the fuel economy standards that are driven by the whole climate change agenda and trying to get emissions down. And so now you have these cars that are driving around. You still have to be able to pull the same load, still have to be able to drive 140 miles an hour, except you have to do it at 35 miles to the gallon in a 3/4 ton pickup truck. Like, okay, I guess it's going to be made out of paper.
Don't go out in the rain.
You're not going to be able to handle that amount of steel driving around. So everything's made out of aluminum and fiberglass and plastic, and you get hit and your car's destroyed. Unless shout out to the Volvo people who do a little bit better than everybody else, but I think even them, still those cars aren't made like the. You go back, find like an LTD from like 1963 or something like that. It's built completely differently from anything you'll find now.
Right.
For sure.
Actually, I think it was, I'm still trying to find the full story on this. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure what happened with like this whole, the SUV market when those were created, they were trying to make cars a little bit bigger, and they were like, hey, you know what? If we just call it a truck, then we don't have to hit those same mile per gallon standards.
Yeah.
So let's just put a couple extra seats in it, but we'll put it on a truck frame enough to call it a truck.
Right.
But like even you had like the original RAV4, which was just like this little weenie mobile.
Yeah.
That like my sister had one of these. Like that was
like a 2-seater SUV or something.
Yes. Yeah.
You're right.
To call it the gutless wonder because it could barely make it up a hill. But it was considered a truck. So they didn't have to hit that mile per gallon limit. But it's interesting. It's like, okay, so you want to make some arbitrary rules? Okay, well, let's find the loopholes.
Right. And that's the thing, is there's always going to be that creativity to find those loopholes.
Plato.
Someone's gonna find a way around it.
Plato said, honest people don't need laws because they're honest people, and criminals find their way around laws.
Well, and not only that, but like I think criminals also find ways to like exploit laws to their benefit. Like they will. The biggest criminal gang is the ones that makes the laws, because they find a way to make it to where they get to keep doing something, and now nobody else can go up to compete with them anymore because they've cut off the path up that ladder to that competition. So
yeah, like Nancy Pelosi's trading or something like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I do want to like touch on it, because it's the idea of, I know we tend to get like caught up on not to say that it's not worth getting caught up on a little bit, but the government is going to do that. Like some of this stuff is not just whether we have like state oppression or not. Some of this stuff, like to the point about like the techno-feudalism thing, it's also, some of this is like, it's an attention economy that's all based on like getting you trapped in like this cycle of like, you can't ever stop playing with this stuff, refreshing your Twitter feed or, scrolling through YouTube. When the more and more this stuff is designed to keep continuously feeding you the type of thing that's going to keep you like addicted to those apps and everything, it's dangerous on a different level, on like a psychological, spiritual, whatever you want to call, like your like self-ownership level, where like you have allowed yourself to become enslaved in a different way in your mind by like this stuff it's great, like what you were saying about your friend and the TikTok thing. Like it's great to have stuff that's tailored towards like the technology that you're interested in. That's cool. But if it's so perfect that it makes it to where, unless you have a really, really strong will and you can fight it off, to where like it's designed to be like, I know you wanted to go to sleep, but
right,
you won't believe what I have for you next, and to get you, and like, you get into things like pornography and some of the other things that are like way more addictive than like what is the new microchip that's coming out in a computer, which I guess, can still be just as addictive for some people. But, it's that kind of thing where like you start getting trapped into these things where like, now you're not productive. You're not spending time with your family. Your kids are like, desperate for attention. And so anyway, they go and find their attention that way too. And now we're all just like these zombies, and we look like the people on WALL-E, where we're fat, overweight, and just sitting with an iPad in our face, talking to the person right next to us, and we're sucking Slurpees out of a straw,
Right. Yeah, no, I think there's definitely like and I guess like I wasn't trying to get him to join TikTok for the sake of, because like that, like the content you're talking about, like that's not even, I mean, I know there's algorithms that are pushing that content, and that's the algorithm that's pushing you to get you addicted to the screen. And that's like what you're talking about. So like they are definitely two separate things.
Sure.
But and one is like, I mean, like that's the thing, right? If I spend an entire day, like, if I spend like 3 days straight on my laptop, my wife will probably yell at me like, what are you doing? But if I'm writing my book, then like, to me, it's like, okay, that was worth it. It's productive
That's
time.
different.
I'm doing something productive. I'm going to change the world. But it's like, if I was just sitting here scrolling Twitter for 3 days straight, then by the time she kicks in the door, like, what have you been doing in here for 3 days? I'd probably be embarrassed. Like, where did that time go? And it's interesting. Like you mentioned, I forgot what word you used, but like or I guess like a slave to yourself, right?
Right.
Because it's like
your passions and your desires and everything else.
If your life could be, and I know this isn't the best way to measure life, but if your life could be measured in like a number of minutes, and it's like slavery was about, it wasn't about human captivity or anything like that. It was about extracting labor from somebody else, right? And if you look at like, okay, well, if you're just gonna like allow somebody else to extract your labor, your time, your energy to stare at a screen and scroll, so that ultimately you're going to give money to an advertiser who's going to give money to the platform, like it's profitable for them, for you to spend all of your time staring at the screen. And And it's like when you're scrolling and like you totally lose track of time, like how long have I been looking at this shit?
Right.
Then it's like you just gave away all of that time that you could have been productive. And like, yeah, you might have gotten like a little bit of dopamine out of it, but it's like, was it really worth it?
Right.
And like,
Yeah, there are
especially
better
when you
things
add
to
it
do.
up over time, like over a month,
The
like
cumulative effect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
For sure. So Dan, we're coming up on that last 30 or guess last 10 minutes. Where are you going from here, man? And I know that we could probably go on forever, but
yeah.
But where are you going? What you doing?
I'm probably gonna go have dinner.
No. I meant a little farther out than that.
That's a good place to start.
Yeah. Sure. I don't like to plan that far out. So I'm definitely focusing on the book right now. I'm focusing on Blood of Tyrants. Those are kind of like my two main priorities. But you know, after that, I definitely want to get back into doing a little bit of touring, probably once the book is done. So I can
come through Indianapolis. Look me up, man. I got a bed that you can stay in.
Absolutely. And yeah, like I wanted, like this is the interesting thing about the book, like, and I think a really good thing a really good thing that came out of breaking it up into separate books is the first book is really just about taxes, the history of taxes, and like if you're like not like absolutely livid that there are so many taxes that you should be, and it's really just about that. So what I'm hoping is that this book will kind of introduce people in the mainstream to how malicious taxes are. Supreme Court even said, like in the 1800s, the power to tax is the power to destroy. If you can put a tax on it at 5%, why can't you put a tax on it at 100%? And you can completely destroy an industry, a person, a business, whatever you want. And so ironically, that's when they were arguing against a state taxing the federal government. And they said,
of course.
Right. Tax the people, not us. Come on.
Hey, look, man. I've often said, like, the only time a politician is telling the truth is when they're saying that their opponent is corrupt.
Right.
And so it's like that's naturally the outgrowth of that, right? Is like when they tell on themselves when they like, hey, listen, man, like you have the power to destroy. Like, now we don't. Our taxes don't do that. You know?
None of that.
Different here.
But yeah, what I'm hoping is that I can bring some more of these ideas to a more mainstream audience.
Good.
And then one of the follow-up books is How to Not Pay Taxes, which, like, if I know if I come out of the gate with that one, it's like,
yeah,
don't put this conspiracy theory on the air. Conspiracy theorists on the air.
You might want to call it like How to Find Waldo.
So yeah, but it's really interesting, and I'm hoping it's going to be an interesting civics lesson for people who learned it from the government schools, because it's totally different. It'll hopefully be a good American and world history lesson for people who learned their American and world history from the government, because a lot of that's all wrong. And it's actually like one of the biggest things that I had to struggle with was like, no one's going to believe me. Oh, that's okay. I can just link to the Supreme Court case right here. You don't believe me? Go read it for yourself. Because like all this stuff is like it's available online. Sometimes you got to dig for it, like some of these original treaties, especially when they're translated. But like, man, when you find the stuff that's not in the textbooks and you actually read what was written instead of what some educator wrote about it 200 years later, it's night and day. It's completely different. So I'm hoping this book is kind of gonna drive that wedge further into the mainstream to kind of get the blue and red crowd to see that there's a different way to look at things.
Agreed, and I think that's what we've got to get. We've got to get the mainstream. We can't fiddle around with these assholes that already have chosen a team. We have to get the people that are and yes, it's true that yes, they're more concerned about what their cat's doing and what they're having for dinner. I understand that, but they are also the only ones we have a chance of getting to move our direction in large mass, because the other people have chose a team.
And I think it's not like I was kind of I hate using these words, but I'm gonna start. Yeah, I was kind of more black pilled about it before, like it's never gonna happen. Those people just don't care. But I kind of started to realize through like my travels and conversations that like, no, actually these people will care. But like you said, they're too busy playing with their cat. Help them to understand how they'd have so much more free time to play with their cat. And then they will be like, yeah, why am I busting my ass 40 hours a week when I should be home playing with my cat?
Yeah.
And it's like you can't because of taxes. Like it's we don't need a socialist utopia. We don't need the government to take care of us from but we have technology that has made producing food and shelter and water and energy and the things that we need to survive requires so little manpower that the cost of it is really nothing if we just get government out of the way.
Absolutely. Dan, I think that's the best place to leave that. Do you agree, Chad?
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Amen. Dan, again, I want to thank you for coming on. For those that have made it this far, definitely give Dan a follow. If you haven't, if you aren't following him, one of the smartest people I know, and we know some pretty smart people, and definitely somebody who is not only what I enjoy about Dan, and you'll find out. And if you've made it this far, I'm sure you've seen this as well. He's not only really smart, he's also entertaining, which is part of the piece. And
it's the intelligence mixed with the willingness to not take the superficial answer for an answer and to dig deeper and to get down to the roots of things that makes it to where that's where some of this stuff comes from. Is it's born of that effort and that research, that work. And then he's also entertaining too. He can be funny, so
for sure
makes it enjoyable along the way.
And please do visit that link that we have down there and make some donations, because every person that we can get turned on to the ideas of liberty, the better. And I don't care if they're just barely turned on. This is a road. It takes a while to walk it, get them to take the first step. That's all that we got to do. And so again, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. And that open invitation is always there for you if you ever want to come back on.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Well, thanks again. And everybody, stay free.
Be sure.